Yo, this is the Scarcity Studios YouTube channel. Please don't forget to like, comment, share and subscribe. And our sponsors are Alpha Claims and Hire Birmingham, the leading and best accident management company. Get a replacement car anywhere in 1 hour. I really appreciate you joining me again today, and we've been really busy this week on the channel. Before we talk about the Mi5 news, I want to talk about the protests that are taking place outside Scotland Yard today in London. The protest moved from Scotland Yard to Parliament Square shortly after 4:30, where crowds gathered to speeches and participated in chants. And there's been a lot of questions as to who is involved in these organisations, and there's several people that have actually organised this, and I'm sure, like many other rallies, that they get infiltrated for political means. This is not unheard of, and it's not something to be ignored. They said the majority of the crowd dispersed by 5:45, but there is definitely still groups that are there now. There was big standoffs with the police, and people were chanting ACAB, which means all cops are BASTARDs. And even though YouTube would not advertise on this video, if I swear, I'd get deranked even further in the recommendations. The Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, said the scenes from Clapham Common are unacceptable. The police have a duty to enforce COVID, and the images from the night at times were neither appropriate or proportionate. He was in contact with the Commissioner to seek an explanation as to what happened. A lot of the placards that were at the protest outside Scotland Yard had messages aimed at Preeti Patel, and she also has requested a full report from the police. But there's multiple reasons why people are actually at this protest as well. It's to do with the right to protest in the UK. The government is running through legislation for the House of Commons in order to get a bill passed that will stop people from having noisy protests or anything that could disturb the way that people go about their day-to-day lives. Civil rights campaigners have said that this is against human rights for protest. So the majority of people, of course, are out there angry at the way the Met Police has responded to the vigil yesterday. But also there's a lot of people that are there in relation to this new bill that could prevent people from having protests. The coronavirus pandemic has had an unprecedented impact on the ability to take to the streets and protest. The Home Office is now preparing public order legislation that will give the police extra powers to restrict future protests. The Police Crime Sentencing and Courts Bill was announced today, and it includes plans to strengthen the police powers to tackle non-violent protests, and they will also disrupt anything that could affect Parliament. The Home Secretary Preeti Patel has directed this bill at the likes of Extinction Rebellion and also some of the Black Lives Matter movements that took place last year. After the summer of demonstrations in 2020, Preeti Patel requested a review by the HM Inspectorate of Constabulary, Fire and Rescue to look at the way protests are policed and whether police forces should have new public order laws to protect the rights of others to go about their daily business. This bill is going to change a lot of different things as well. They're going to increase the life sentence in the UK so it becomes an official life sentence as opposed to the limit that is usually imposed. And this is following the bombing at the concert in Manchester. And this bill will affect life after the pandemic as well, because the UK is currently coming out of lockdown, and by June the 21st they're expecting to open up major events. So this would actually stop people from doing these sorts of protests after lockdown and without the restrictions. So I thought this was really important to talk about, and definitely to highlight what is going on there as well. And in other news coming from Mi5, there is a new bill again that has gone through, and this has caused a lot of outrage outrage, and news emerged 4 days ago that the Court of Appeal ruled that the Mi5 agents can legally commit crimes, and this includes torture and murder, all in the line of duty. They say intelligence officers operating on behalf of Mi5 are allowed to commit serious crimes in pursuit of intelligence. The UK Court of Appeal ruled that the intelligence agency can authorise agents to participate in serious crimes in the UK because of the need to protect national security. The Court of Appeal judges ruled that the secret policy which allows them does not put Mi5 above the law. 4 human rights organisations that include Amnesty International have challenged the policy and said that it takes away people's human rights and is a licence to kill for the government. Privacy International said, the Court of Appeal concluded that there must be guidance in handling informants, and specific authorisation to commit crimes can only be given when the authorising officer is satisfied that the potential risk to the public from the criminal activity is outweighed by the benefit to the public interest derived from the anticipated information the agent may provide and the benefit of the activity in question. So that otherwise translates as for the greater good. So they can do something if they can justify to their superiors that it's for the greater good. So these human rights groups are back in court appealing this again. And we'll definitely have to follow this and see if this does lead to any cases that may help Mi5 agents get away with these sorts of crimes. So I'll be really interested to know what people think on both of these bills. I really appreciate you joining me today, and rest in peace to Sarah Everard. And I'll be back again very shortly with some more news. Peace.
On the 12th of February 1989, Pat Finucane, an Irish lawyer in Belfast, sat at his kitchen table to have dinner with his wife and 3 children. As they ate, 2 gunmen burst through the door. They entered the room and shot Mr. Finucane 14 times. He was killed by a loyalist paramilitary group that then, as the Prime Minister at the time, David Cameron, admitted in 2011, was acting in complicity with British security services. Far from stopping Mr. Finucane's murder, the Prime Minister described, and I quote, the shocking levels of state collusion in Mr. Finucane's murder. His family are still owed a public inquiry into the murder. Deeply troubling acts of state agents like the Finucane case are not isolated. In 2010, it came to light that for 40 years, Britain's police had run covert operations spying on thousands of civilians. More than 1,000 political groups were spied on. Overwhelmingly, it was left-wing, anti-racist and climate justice groups that were spied on, with just 3 far-right groups included on the list. The Sky Cops revelations have shown that police operatives deceived women into sexual relationships, and that even spying on grieving families seeking justice, including the parents of Stephen Lawrence. Madam Deputy Speaker, this bill must be opposed. It places no limits on the crimes that state agents can be authorised to commit. It doesn't prohibit torture, it doesn't prohibit murder, it doesn't prohibit sexual violence. Instead, all it requires is that authorising officers themselves believe the conduct is appropriate, that is necessary by broadly defined criteria, and that it meets requirements that might be imposed by an order by the Secretary of State. Even the FBI expressly bans operatives from certain criminal conduct, but this bill doesn't ban any type of criminal conduct for British state agents. And the grounds upon which the authorisations can be granted are ill-defined and wide-ranging. Not just national security, but also, and I quote, to prevent disorder and to promote the interests of the economic well-being of the United Kingdom. This has rightly raised alarm bells from trade unions like my union Unite and justice campaigns like the All Grieve Truth and Justice campaign, who fear that these powers could be used to interfere with the legitimate activities of trade unions. And the bill grants these powers to a dizzying array of agencies, not just intelligence agencies and the police, but the Competition and Markets Authority, the Gambling Commission, and the Environment Agency, just to name a few. The oversight for authorisation of potentially serious crimes is scandalously weak. There are no provisions in this bill for warrants or independent judicial approval. Instead, authorisation would be granted internally. This means that incredibly serious crimes could be authorised with less oversight than what is currently required for phone tapping or police searches. And Madam Deputy Speaker, as the human rights group Reprieve have noted, survivors of the Sky Cop scandal have sought justice through the courts for abuses that they suffered. But this bill will block future claims being brought forward since it outlaws civil action against authorised activities. This is utterly unconscionable. Madam Deputy Speaker, in the bill's defence, the government claims that public authorities are bound by the Human Rights Act. And for that reason, the prohibition against crimes like torture are guarded against. But in reality, this offers no protection against agent criminality because in the government's view, the Human Rights Act does not apply to crimes committed by covert agents. As the government told the Investigatory Powers Tribunal in November 2019 in tasking agents, and again, I quote, "The state is not the instigator of that activity and cannot be treated as somehow responsible for it." According to the government's own standards, therefore, the bill would not place any limits on the crimes agents could be authorised to commit. Not to torture, not to murder, not to sexual violence. I must progress. Madam Deputy Speaker, this bill marks the latest step in a frightening descent into a growing authoritarianism coming from this government. In the past 2 weeks, it has proposed the effective decriminalisation of torture for British soldiers overseas, the shipping of asylum seekers more than 4,000 miles away to be imprisoned on Ascension Island, the ban on anti-capitalist teaching materials in schools, and now this, licensing undercover agents to commit torture, sexual violence and murder. Madam Deputy Speaker, this descent into authoritarianism should be a concern to us all. It must be resisted.
Hear, hear.